Hello and howdy. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Angular Air. My name is Alyssa Nichol. I'm your host for today, and I'm so excited for this episode where we are going to be diving into HttpResource. And with me on the panel today, I have Justin Schwarzenberger.
Hey, what's going on?
And I also have Mike Brocky. Mike.
Hello.
Wrong way. There we go. And joining us as our surprise guest for the episode, we have Manfred Steyer. Hi, Manfred.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I am so glad that you reached out to join us. We were just going to have a super chill episode and walk through this new, I think, 19.2 feature. But I'm so glad that you're joining us and that you've got some exciting things to show with it. But before we dive into the actual nitty-gritty of the episode, could you do an introduction for yourself for anyone who might be new to the community?
Yeah, sure. I'm Manfred Steyer, and I'm a trainer and consultant for Angular. And I and my colleagues help a lot of companies with Angular for the enterprise. We do workshops there, we do trainings there, and also reviews. And I'm also quite connected to the Angular community. I'm in the GDE program, and I write a lot about Angular and so on.
Awesome. And we have a lot of people on the chat. I'm just going to flip through comments. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Drop your questions in the chat. Manfred is willing to take them all. And we'll all jump in, of course, and help. But I think without further ado, Manfred, would you like slides up? How do you want to start? How do you want to start us off?
Yeah, we can get started with some slides just to get us into the right mood of implementing some stuff.
Okay.
Awesome. So here we go. So as mentioned, this is about the new HTTP resource. And I want to get started with a little tiny thought experiment. Usually, when we think about our applications, we think about the script, a script when playing theater. A script we go through step by step, where each and every command in the script is executed. And this metaphor is okay for most applications. However, when we want to switch over to reactive programming, and the truth is with signals and the resource API, we are switching over to it, then we need also to change our thinking about our code. Because when we do reactive programming, our code should be seen less as a script with comments and more as a marble run. A marble run where several marbles go through. Those marbles might be the data items that are represented by our signals, also by resources. And you can see it here, but in an application, those marbles can merge together. You can have several marbles merging together to a new marble, or sometimes one marble is split to further marbles. Usually we do this with computed, with linked signal, and or with the resource. And at the end of this marble run, some marbles are coming out, and those marbles are usually displayed. Those marbles are usually displayed using data binding. That means we present it somehow to the user. There are some exceptions to this rule. Sometimes we have to do something else because data binding does not work all the times, but in most cases, it's just data binding. So this is how we need to adjust our thinking to really make sense of the new signal story. Because I figured out the hard way that if we only see a signal as some little tiny thing with getters and setters, we run into sharp edges all the times. So this helps a lot. And this is also what this presentation here is about. I want to get started with the signal graph, which is the technical term of what I called the marble run before. I want to slightly show how to use the resource API within the signal graph to fetch some data. I have a demonstration. And I also want to show how the signal graph in this demonstration looks like. Those steps 1 to 4 are really, really quick steps. And then in the remaining part of this episode, we can just concentrate on live coding. implementing something with all the knowledge we have gained there, adding some HTTP resources to our application. I have already introduced myself, so I will be a bit quicker here on this slide. As mentioned, I'm Manfred. I do a lot of stuff with Angular, especially Angular trainings and consultancy, and I'm also quite connected to the Angular community. By the way, I live in Austria. I do a lot of stuff in Germany, and I'm always happy to work together with people around the globe, for instance, with the nice people at Angular Air. Okay, cool. So let's get started with the reactive graph. So before I told you we need to adjust our thinking about our application, it should be seen as a marble run. So for this here, I have a little example from another demonstration application I'm sometimes using. It's about desserts, a very tasty application. And you see here, I can load desserts. They are put into a signal. I can load ratings for those desserts. And then both comes together. The desserts and the ratings are computed together to rate the desserts. In terms of marbles, I could say, well, desserts is my first marble, my purple marble, and ratings is a pink marble. And both marbles go in there to compute that and are merged to my rated desserts marble, which is flowing further through my marble run and which is finally displayed in the template of our component. The thing is, this marble run here is not connected at all to my criteria I want to use to search for desserts, which is here the original name and the English translation. So currently there is no good way for doing this. Of course, we could implement a button, and when we click the button, then another marble run is started with this and that data here. But until Angular 19, there was no official way of doing this within the reactive graph, at least not when we wanted to stay in the signals world. Of course, always you could have switched over to RxJS. You could have used switch map and so on here, but in the Angular world, there was no possibility for connecting this in a reactive way. And thankfully, with Angular 19, this was changing because Angular 19 gave us this resource API. And basically, the resource API has the possibility of providing a request and a loader. There are some additional properties, but those are the most important ones. The request is just a signal, and when this signal is changing, the loader is triggered. The loader gets some parameters, and those parameters contain all the values of the request signal, and then I can use those parameters to look up some data. By default, we are going with promises here, but there is also an Rx resource that allows you to use RxJS in here. However, I think in most of the situations, when going with a resource, we are doing some kind of data fetching. We are reaching out to some HTTP endpoints to get something. And to streamline this, we have now the new HttP resource. Before I show you this, let's have a look at the marble run here. We have our desserts criteria, which consists of the light red and dark red marble, and these criteria go into my resource here. It's flowing in. The resource is acting a bit like the Duracell rabbit. You know him or her? I have not checked. It is fetching some data, and then the data comes out via the value property, and then the value property goes into computed, and so we get out our rated desserts. This really shows nicely the whole transformation within the marble run. And as mentioned before, usually we just reach out to an HTTP endpoint when doing something like this, and that's why we now have this HTTP resource. It landed with Angular 19.2, and like the resource itself, it's still experimental, but it shows the road we are going down. It shows the idea, the the vision of the Angular team of how reactivity should look like in future versions of Angular. Here, I define an URL, I define some parameters. I can also define some additional stuff like, headers, or whether I want to pass over credentials and so on. And what I'm getting back is a resource holding the result of this HTTP request. And this allows me to go then further within my marble run. Of course, you might say, well, I don't want to have this URL in the middle of my component. But the thing is, you can completely put this whole creation of this HTTP resource and put it into a data service. That means in the future, instead of just returning an observable, you will return a HTTP resource to the consumer. Yeah, so much for the theory. And now let's have a look into an example I have.
Real quick, you said that you would have an HTTP resource, but the HTTP resource function there right above where your cursor is, that actually returns a resource, or probably a resource reference. So externally from that service, it doesn't really care what type of resource you're using. You're getting the same resource object back.
Yeah, totally. That's an important point. Yeah. That means as a consumer, you have not think about its HTTP resource or is it something else. It's just a resource you install as part of your data flow.
That's all. Sorry.
Awesome. Yeah, feel free to start each and every discussion that comes in mind. It's completely fine. I think that's also one of the characteristics of Angular Air, and that's why I really love it. It's always interactive, it's not just a presentation.
You're getting a lot of love in the chat, and also Thomas Emery said that if tiramisu doesn't get rated 5 stars, he's out. So
yeah, that's important. Tiramisu is fine. Yeah. Okay, so I think I had a little tiny demonstration application for all of this, and let's see. Yeah. Here it is. Do you see it?
This does not look anything like the resources that I've created.
No. It's a completely different kind of resource, but I'm happy it's displayed. So I can here load several levels.
Oh my goodness.
The levels are described using JSON. There is a level description, and this level description points to tiles from a tile map. And something I did not know before I did this example, but in the original Super Mario game, you had all the tiles you see there in different themes. Each and every tile was available in this overworld theme, in this underground theme, underwater, and castle. Of course, usually a theme was tightly connected to a level, but in theory, you could have switched through all the different themes here. And we can also scroll through our level here and switch around. So this is a lot of fun. I could do this the whole day. I think this is the original theme for Underground. Yeah, looks good.
So John Anderson said that he needs to rethink how I do demos. And Michael said, where's the CRUD? Where's the HTTP, Manfred? I gave up my dreams of game programming to do CRUD.
Yeah, so same here. I also started with doing some games. And then I figured out that I can earn much more money with just doing CRUD. And it's also easier. So
Facts. That's facts.
Yeah. So let me also show you the progress counter here. I can throttle here everything to slow 3G. And then I can say disable cache and reload. And this is also a feature of the resource. Look here, it's counting up. Of course, my tiles map is quite tiny. So loading it happens immediately if I don't throttle it. But if I throttle it to 3G, then we see that the resource can also give us some information about the progress here. One more time, because it's that fun. Hey, yeah. Okay, cool. So let's have a look at the resource files I'm using here. I think the most funny one is this
Oh my
tiles
gosh.
PNG. This tiles PNG. I have borrowed it from a resource in the internet. And what you see here is you have here on this big PNG file all the tiles we might need for constructing levels. And one thing that is a bit more exciting is just by defining an offset, just by jumping from left to right or from the top to the bottom, given a certain offset, you can completely switch the theme. So switching the theme is just about adding some pixels to the offset, and that's it. And yeah, with all of those tiles, we can construct our levels. And this is what I'm doing. Currently, I need to write my levels by hand, but having a level designer would be a nice add-on. A level is just a data structure like this here. We have a background color, a level ID, and all the items where I'm defining which tile is displayed where, and if I want to repeat it from left to right or from the top to the bottom. And yeah, that's it more or less. Now, by the way, there's also this overview file for my drop-down field because I want to know which levels are available.
Did you do this like cube by cube? Is this how you like
yeah
mentally mapped it out of like, I will have air here and ground here, and then you just kind of
Yeah, totally. But honestly, I looked at the original video game to have something similar like we know from it. And I have only modeled 2 levels, and also those levels are just partially modeled. So it was not that a big effort.
I'm impressed. Thomas says this is like the perfect demo. I started working on a game in Unity over the summer in my free time, so I'm definitely able to follow along. Oh, this is really cool, Manfred.
Awesome, great feedback. Yeah, for instance, my 9-year-old boy was really excited when he saw what I'm doing there, and now he's really interested into Angular.
Oh,
I did not tell him that the usual Angular application looks not like this. I did not want to destroy his motivation, but yeah. Okay, so coming back to our own reactive graph. If we look at the reactive graph of our application, then we see we have, of course, a label key. We can select the label we want to display. And we have a style, which is the theme we want to display, like overworld or underground or castle. We have a flag. It's just a Boolean that tells us whether animation is on or off. And we have a canvas as well as this loading progress. So when looking at those items here, at those nodes of my reactive graph, those nodes are on the one side all the inputs, and on the other side all the outputs of our reactive flow. Style, animation, level key is the input, and the progress and the canvas we are painting on is the output. And then we can add some resources. For instance, a level resource that is triggered every time the level key is changing. It will load the respective level. Or we can add the titles map resource that is loading this huge titles map, and it informs us about the current progress. Furthermore, we can have a titles resource, which is taking the titles map and the style, and using both the right offsets are calculated, and then it is constructing my tiles set I'm now using for the current level. By the way, for bringing this and this here together, I have a helper function as part of my games engine. We will treat this games engine today as a black box. We will just call its methods. So what do we have else? We have a render effect. So usually we should avoid effects, but in this case, the effect is the right building block because we need to do some, or to put it differently, we need to display something that cannot be displayed with data binding. We cannot show a Super Mario level with data binding. we need to draw tiles on a canvas. So usually you need a method for this. And now we can just put everything to this rendering effect. That means when one of those things here is changing, the effect will rerun and start rendering again. Rendering with or without an animation, rendering this or that level, and so on. And all of this is then rendered to the canvas. Furthermore, just to have a little simple resource to get started with, I have a resource for loading the overview of all the levels, the name of all the levels files for my dropdown field. Yeah, this is my reactive graph, and this is what I will use now to implement our example. By the way, before we implement this example, just 2 more slides about the effect. Usually, you don't use an effect that often, but you need it when you need to connect the reactive world with the imperative world, the world with the marble run and the world with your script. That means at the end of our marble run, we are taking out this marble and we say, well, now we need to do something step by step, command by command in a traditional way. Now we need to render this level or this animation using this game engine here. So perhaps this is an typical example, an ideal typical example for when to use an effect. And now let's have a look at a demonstration for this. By the way, if you have questions, as mentioned, feel free to ask them. And I will now switch over to another branch where we need to fill in the gaps, where we need to fill in the missing resources. For this, I have some to-do commands, and I think I'm getting started with the level loader. So this here is the service that loads my levels and the level overview. And just to have a nice comparison to the traditional way of loading stuff, I have here another function or method that is still using the HTTP client to get the level overview. And now let's implement this in a reactive way. So for this, let's call HttpResource. And here I'm passing in, let's say, an URL. And let's say I'm
in order to have access to this, do you have to do, you provide HTTP client? Do you do the same thing for HTTP
Yeah, you need to
resource?
provide the HTTP client. That's a good point, actually, because the HTTP client is currently used underneath the covers of the HTTP resource. This might change in the future. Let's see. But
It
currently,
needs to be,
it's an implementation detail.
it needs to be provided at the application level, but with the change that you're making internally into the service, you don't need to inject it because you're not using it directly.
Yeah, now,
Okay.
as I don't need it anymore, I can throw it out. Yeah, totally. Okay, so if we look here at the return, then we see, well, it does not fit because we get an HTTP resource ref of level overview, which is good, or undefined, which isn't. I don't want to have undefined. However, a resource by default always gives you undefined before something has been loaded, because loading happens in an asynchronous way, and that's why we have some amount of time without a result. But we can totally bypass this by handing in a default value. And meanwhile, to prevent undefined, and I guess a lot of Angular developers adopted this style meanwhile, I have null objects for each and every type. For instance, init level overview, which is just a dummy object because everything is better than undefined. This is also quite a usual pattern in the area of state management and so on.
Just so we don't get too far ahead, you need to update the URL there so it matches to grab the overview JSON.
Sorry?
The URL in your resource.
Yeah.
For the first parameter is your
yeah, you're right. Thank you.
Yep. Not me. Shout out to chat.
You just saved my day. Thank you.
Chat's
So-
also saying Evgeny said that not anymore. Now it will throw when there's no value.
Yeah.
I assume that's like a new change.
Yeah, so now we start with this initial level overview, and we can directly use it until something is loaded from over there. Okay, cool. So this signature here is not without criticism. Some people say don't use this signature because it's not reactive. I mean, in this case, it does not matter whether it's reactive or not, but in other cases it will. But the thing is, it is considered best practice in some areas, and perhaps we will be forced into this to use here a lambda expression. And why this makes a lot of sense can be shown with the next example here, where I'm just putting in a parameter into my URL. Because now perhaps every time this parameter is changing, I want to re-trigger the resource. And this will not happen without having a lambda expression. But let me show. Here we can say return HTTP resource. It's of type level. And I'm passing in now. Let's do it the wrong way first. I'm passing in now the string. I'm passing in now this string, not this one, that one. And here we are lucky because label key is already a signal that returns string or undefined. When there is no label selected, it returns undefined. So we could do something like this here. However, if this is just a string, then the resource will not be re-triggered when the label key is changing. If this is a lambda expression or a function, we can think about it like a computed. Actually, underneath the covers, it's a computed, and every time now one of the used signals is changing, we are getting the resource triggered again.
So Matthew said that we'll remove that non-reactive signature. It's in a PR. So that means essentially like you'd have to do it this way, right?
Yeah. So this was what I had in the back of my head. I was not sure if it's already a thing or if there are just discussions about it, but I really like this because it's one bit for less, you know?
Absolutely.
Okay. So there is another thing. When the label key is undefined, we cannot load our label. It would now load an undefined JSON, which is not there. That means we need to find a way to avoid the resource from triggering. And this can be done. This can be done by looking at all the parameters that might have a value. And if they are not there, then we can define return undefined, and otherwise we can return our URL. So the thing is, when we are returning undefined, then the resource is not triggered. Of course, syntax-wise, this might need some additional love. Let's see if Angular comes with some improvements for this, or perhaps we need to write some helper functions to streamline this here a bit. Okay, and I think that's it. So why do we have, okay, we don't have the default value. So default value and init level. And now we are good to go.
That was
So
some fast. That was some fast debugging on the fly, Manfred. I'm impressed.
So besides this here, this option with just handing in an URL, I mean, squeezing in parameters is not that nice, I guess, in most cases. They are not how do you call it? Not encrypted, but encoded, yeah. You can also pass in here an object with an URL. Oops, come on, with an URL.
Which, let's be real, the object is the sane person's way to go. My husband loves the other way, and he does it all the time, and I'm always like, "Ugh." I don't know. Mike,
Yeah,
Justin,
so
what are your thoughts? You go an object?
I like the object.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'm also team object. I mean, this here is nice for examples, but yeah, this is here how real developers are doing it. Don't tell your husband.
I'm not a fan of right or wrong. I'm a fan of consistency.
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
All the calls
Always-
to HTTP
Always
resource-
politically correct, Mike. Never wanting to ruffle feathers.
You and I
Wait.
should work together. I ruffle lots of feathers.
I've never heard the Mike's name and not wanting to ruffle feathers in the same
Okay.
sentence. So
Oh,
this
you're
is
saying
new. I don't
plenty
know.
of feathers are ruffled? I got you. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Mike is the Switzerland of Angular.
Oh, just before you joined us, Manfred, when we were getting ready, Mike was like, "Yeah, I know what me and Justin are going to do." And he started listing out some work tasks. And I was like, "That's not what you're doing this weekend,
the
right?"
weekend.
Weekend plans.
Okay, yeah. So this is how you can pass in parameters. And by the way, here you find most of the other things you might already know from the HTTP client. We have headers, we have report progress, which is something I will use in a minute, transfer cache for SSR and with credentials to send over cookies and some authorization headers. I'm not sure if we should talk too much about the body and the method, because the resource API is mainly for fetching data. However, with method, you could say, well, let's do a post call. I think this is mostly for, let's call it fallen APIs, for bad APIs that should have provided something via GET, but they provide it via post calls. And there are some reasons for this, like a query with a lot of parameters. Some people like to do post instead. It is not right in terms of the HTTP semantics, but it might be okay-ish in some circumstances. And besides this, sometimes we cannot even control if it is get or post or put or something else. We have to take what we get. That's why there is the possibility to switch over to something else than get, while in most cases it will be get, because yeah, resources are not for saving data, it's for fetching data.
Delete it. I don't like it.
Pardon?
He said, "Delete it. I don't like it." You're making his eye twitch. You're making Mike upset.
I don't want to think about posting.
Personally, I think it's great. Let's keep at it.
I see it as a last resort. I mean, if you have to consume something like a soap service, I really hope that no one has to consume soap services in the front end, but if you have, then you need post or something like this.
This is one of those things why I really try to champion successful practices over best practices, right? Because like you sometimes have to do this stuff. And so the best practice really doesn't apply to the situation because you're going to have to do this. So it's more kind of like these are successful practices, right? That ideally we want to do, but you may run into something that you have to do different. So whatever helps you be successful.
Yeah, John said that payment handlers in his country use post for everything.
And you know, besides this, never look into the sausage factory. So yeah, it's fine. So what is this guy telling me here? Duplicate function. Oh yeah, it's just an alternative. Yeah, it's just for the sake of demonstration. Perhaps as we agreed that we like the second option more, let's go with this one. So I don't need this parameter here because it's part of the URL, but just for the sake of demonstration, I'm putting it in there. Okay, awesome. By the way, if we also look into the second object here with the default value, there are some further things like the equal function and the injector. We already know from all the other reactive functions, and there is pass. And pass was something that was discussed a bit before it was released as experimental with 19.2, because the original name was map. And so some people, including my lesser self, thought it's about mapping what we get back to something we want to have. Like if we get an envelope, mapping it to the body or to an inner object. But it turned out that the idea the Angular team had when introducing this map, which is now called parse, to provide a way to validate your values or to revive your values. Perhaps you know this reviver from JSON.parse. It gives you a way to, for instance, switch out date strings by date objects. But the example I'm seeing most nowadays is using parse to validate the data that comes from the server, which is necessary in situations where we don't fully trust the server. Perhaps it's a third-party thingy, or there is some competition between backend and front-end guys.
Hey, you've been there too. Hey.
Yeah, it happens from time to time. I mean, I have been on both sides during my life, so it's a bit easier for me. But yeah, I see that this can be an issue. Without parse, what you are getting is an type assertion, where we are just pretending that the value we are getting there is of the type we have mentioned above here, which is okay when we trust the backend. But if we want to validate it, we can call some other function here. We could call some functions built with SOT or other third-party vendor tools that allow to do a schema validation. I have written something by myself. Parse, how did I call it? I don't remember. Something with parse, I guess.
You made your own schema validation? What'd you make?
Yeah, just for the sake of demonstration. So it's nothing that is production ready. And you know what they say in all those TV shows for children, don't try this at home. Not without a parent. Yeah, so it's very simple, you know. I'm just looking in there if the characteristics is what I'm expecting. But here also the information, don't do this at home. Use something like SOT in real world. Do level.
Right. Michael said, always enjoy demo utils from the Angular architects crew.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, life is too short for manual schema validation.
I need the t-shirt.
Yeah. Cool, yeah. So this is my level loader. We are good in time. So let's move over to my tiles map loader. This is also quite a nice one because it shows another characteristic of the HttP resource, namely loading something that is not JSON automatically passed to an JavaScript object. Here we need to load a blob, a tiles PNG. And this is also why I decided for this example, because I wanted to have a meaningful example where I needed to work with an image. Because just downloading the image is something we could also do with an image tag. But downloading it into the memory and cutting out the tiles is something where we need to get it as a blob or as an array buffer. Okay, so let's implement this in the way that is supposed to be used with the HTTP resource. I want to get my tiles. And now I want to have report progress. That's fine. But if we look in there, URL. But when we look in there, we don't see here a way to define that we want to have a blob. So this response type here is somehow missing. And that's for the better. Can you still
do it or no?
Yeah, you can do it. There are now, let's call it sub-functions, functions within the functions object. This is also a convention we have in other places in Angular and a lot of other libraries. Meanwhile, think about input and input.require. And now this gives us a blob. So I really like this because if you look into the typing of this get function we are using for almost, I don't know, 6 or 7 years now, then you see this typing is quite complicated. Regarding what you have in here, blob or something else, you have this or that option or not this or that option somewhere else. So it's really modeling some mutual exclusive stuff there. And now with just saying .blob, it's easier.
So by default, HTTP resources JSON?
Yeah.
And then here's other, okay.
And if you want to have something else like a blob, you have to use such a sub-functions. You have blob, you have array buffer, and you have text. In this case, you get plain text. Okay, that's it. Now, the next step is to bring everything together. If we have a look here at our reactive graph, then we see to bring everything together, we need this intermediate resource, which is just a traditional resource that is taking the whole titles map, our style, our theme, and then it returns an object for the rendering engine with the tiles for this level. So for this, we need a traditional resource. Let's move over to it. Here I also have a function that shows what this resource is going to do, but it's working in a non-reactive way. So basically it gets the blob, it gets the style, and if the blob has not been loaded yet, it is returning undefined. Otherwise, it's calling this function from the rendering engine, and this returns an object we can then use for rendering purposes. So let's try this here. Now, something that might be a bit complicated is returning undefined, or to put it in a different way, do not trigger the resource when the tiles map is empty, when the tiles map has not been loaded. We can do this with computed by computing a request. Computed. And in there, we are doing a trick we already used before. We are saying, well, if this tiles map resource does not have a value, I will improve this in a minute. But first of all, let's go with value, because it allows me to run into an open knife. And this open knife allows me to explain another little tiny thing of the design of this resource that is really wonderful. But first of all, let's say if there is not a value, let's return undefined. And otherwise, let's return our request, which consists of our tiles map, tiles map.value, and the style, which is another, you see it here, another signal. This is a very abstract way and a very generic way to represent a signal style. Okay, that's it. Next step, let's set up a resource. Resource. I already have my request. When the request is not undefined, the resource is triggered. Otherwise, it is. And now let's define our loader. The loader gets some parameters. The parameters hold our request. Or perhaps we unwrap it. It's tiles, map, and style. And now we already see a first issue, namely we see that this is not just a request with tiles, map, and style. It could also be undefined. So those undefined values seem to give us a hard time when implementing our stuff. But here we are lucky, because when the request is undefined, the loader is never triggered. We know You know, Angular knows, but TypeScript is currently not knowing. But yeah, we can ease TypeScript a bit. Let's go with this guy here. I think we could make this go away with adjusting the typings a bit. But you know, the resource API is currently experimental, and this might be one of the sharp edges we could get rid of. So let's see what the future brings. Okay, cool. So here now I have my tiles map and I have my style. And it looks like that the tiles map can also be undefined. But if you look here, it's really not the case, especially because, you know, JavaScript is single-threaded. If the value has a value here, it will also have a value there if it is not asynchronous. And that's why I want to show you this little new hasValue method. So this little new hasValue method is not just another method. This was my initial impression, but it's a bit more. It's a so-called type guard. It has this special return value that tells TypeScript that when this here is true, then we don't have undefined as part of our HTTP resource ref. Yeah, this is hard stuff. Usually as application developers, all we care about this is that it works for us. It just works DM, and now the TypeScript compiler knows that the value will be there. Just a little tiny side note, because I'm that happy about it. Okay, so in there we can call extract tiles. And that's it. Style. What's with the style? Ah, yeah. Style is style. Makes sense, doesn't it? Cool. Now I have all my building blocks. Now
So with that hasValue change, can you now remove that bang guard that you had on there?
Sorry, what was the question?
With the hasValue change, can you now remove that param request bang or exclamation mark on your loader?
I need it because I need this one. I don't
think that one.
Because it's another undefined. So this here is the undefined of the whole request.
Okay, gotcha.
And this here is tiles map being undefined in there.
I was wondering the same thing, Justin. I'm glad you asked. Okay.
Honestly, I also tried out when I prepared for this presentation here, because I did not want to think. So first of all, I tried it out, and then I started thinking about it. Yeah. Okay, cool. Now I have all my ingredients for our reactive graph. That means now everything we need to do is connect the dots. So let's go to our level component. And now we can set up our reactive graph. That means now it's a good idea to have this reactive graph somehow in the back of your head. Of course, if you are experienced with reactive programming, if you are really deep into RxJS, all of those metaphors with reactive graphs and marble runs don't make that much sense for you. You just do it. But if you are new to this style of programming, then this helps a lot. Okay, tiles map resource. This tiles map loader, get tiles map resource. Level overview resource. This level overview loader, get level overview resource. Level resource, now it's getting a bit more exciting. Level loader, get level resource, and we need to put something in here, which is our level key. The level key from our inputs. You remember we have level style, we have level key, style, animation, and the canvas. Inputs and outputs. Okay, so pass in the whole level key. Currently, it cannot be undefined, but when we assume that we don't know about the levels upfront, then initially they will be undefined until the overview file has been loaded. That's why I had to do all these tricks with looking at the undefined value and having an undefined request and so on. Tiles resource, yeah, this is now our real resource, our traditional resource, create tiles resource, and we are putting in tiles map resource, and I guess the style. Just connecting the dots. And also here, tiles map progress. There I have a helper function, calculate progress, and it gets my progress from the tiles map. Yeah, tiles map resource dot progress. Dot progress. Yeah. So this progress, let's have a look at the calculation function, can be completely missing, which is, for instance, the case before we started fetching some data. It can contain the amount of loaded bytes and the total amount of bytes we have to download. This depends on your backend. If the backend gives you an HTTP header with the total size, you can calculate here this percentage. And if there is no total size, then we can only display what we have loaded so far. Okay. And I think that's it. So perhaps one little tiny thing, our reload method here. Here I want to reload my two resources, the tiles map resource reload, which is just triggering the resource without any parameter changing, and the level resource. And that's it. So shall we try it out?
Yes.
Let's cross fingers. Oof. So this seems to work. Do we have any error here? No errors, which means I'm very suspicious now. This never happens in real life. And yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And I think Justin has some sound for us.
Oh yeah, do it. Do it.
I can almost hear it out of my memory, you know? Yeah, thank you. Awesome. This gives good vibes, doesn't it? Cool. Yeah. So this is our application here. Perhaps I can improve it a little more. Just one line of code. I just told you before, this signal here starts with a hard-coded initial value. In real world, we might not have a hard-coded initial value because we don't know the names of the levels. And this is where a linked signal might come in handy. A linked signal that takes the value, the first value from our loaded level overview when it's there. If it's not there, it returns undefined because of all the question marks here. If it's there, if we have loaded the overview, if there is a levels property, if there is a first level, I'm returning this level key.
What would happen in the UI? Like if it returned undefined, would it say undefined, or would the dropdown just not exist?
The drop-down will be empty in the beginning. Of course, we can improve this a bit, but currently it will be empty in this current implementation. And this cannot be done with computed, because get first level key is just the initial value, more or less, the initial value after loading, but we need to change it out because we need to switch the levels. That's why we need this working copy provided by the linked signal. That's why linked signal and not computed. It's just a starting value and it can be changed afterwards. Okay, cool. Yeah, and this is our final state of this application here.
Absolutely flipping fantastic and mind-blowing. I don't know. I'm doing what Mike's doing. Like, not only the demo, but your explanations. It was beautiful, Manfred. It was truly beautiful. Your brain is beautiful.
I'm really happy it worked because, live coding is always with risk. Someone told me the human brain is a wonderful thing until you start programming in front of an audience. Then it's not anymore.
I know, but I saw you debugging on the fly today, and I was like, "Whoa, dude's got skills. Dude's got live debugging skills."
Yeah.
Matthew was saying earlier about the typing bug that it should be fixed by the time they promote this to dev preview. So,
Awesome. That's good.
yes.
And that was
Appreciate it.
in reference to having to say that there is a value, the exclamation point at the end of the line,
Right.
when you're destructuring.
With us having to trick TypeScript, right?
Yeah. You don't need this
Well,
exclamation mark.
you're not tricking TypeScript. You're just being explicit versus it being implied.
I'm just
Or
smarter
inferred.
than TypeScript here. At least at this very line of code, I have a bit more knowledge. Not in general. though.
Oh my gosh. So at the end of every episode, we usually do picks. And Manfred, I want you to be thinking if you have anything you want to highlight. It can be in the community or out of the community, and you can have multiple if you want. So I'll let you go last.
I have a question first before we
Oh,
move
you
on.
got a question? Yes.
Yeah. So we started off with resource and RX resource to begin with. And with 19.2, the HTTP resource was added. My question is, do you envision any other types of resources being added in the future?
Good question. So I think that the Angular team is thinking, because sometimes I'm chatting a bit with them, that the resource itself, this traditional resource, is a nice building block for community-based resources. For instance, Alex Riccabo once said at X Twitter that it might be a future nice building block for something like DanStack query. Perhaps they are even switching out their implementation for this resource to align a bit more with the framework. So yeah, I think that's it more or less. There are some discussions about other resource helpers, but I think first and foremost, it's a building block for the community. Or let's say also vendors of stores like the Signal store. Someone could come up with a CRUD resource that is having some assumptions for how a CRUD use case looks like, so that a lot of them can be implemented easily and so on.
I like that.
Oh, Logan earlier had also mentioned, it was in the beginning, that the RFC for this closed an hour before we went live. So I'm going to go ahead and link that in the chat. But Alex did a nice little recap of what the discussion was, where they're headed. And so very excited for that to hit dev preview. Yes. Boys, Justin, Mike, picks, anything exciting?
Yes. I had one pick coming in, but now at the end of the episode, I have 2 picks.
Oh, yes.
So
excellent.
My first pick that I came in with was started watching Mythic Quest on Apple TV. There's 4 seasons of it. It's pretty freaking amazing. So if you're into games, game development, this is a good episode that ties into just overall funny, mature comedy, pretty hilarious, and some great stories. So that's my recommendation. But then my second one coming out of this episode is, I mean, if you're out there and you want to get into teaching or educating other people or talking about development and helping other people understand concepts and stuff, study Manfred. He's amazing. He's just this amazing teacher. He does such a good job at understanding how to deliver these messages, but also the examples and walking you through it and giving you these moments where they're learning moments, but not too complex. I'm always just in awe, Manfred, of how you do your teaching. And so I just really encourage everybody, if you want to do this kind of thing, like
Thank you.
really study what Manfred does. It's amazing.
Awesome feedback.
Good luck finding the time to watch all of those resources. There's a lot of stuff from Manfred.
He does. Absolutely. Mike, you got anything?
I do not have any picks this week.
I have been recovering from a cold, and so this week I got to watch The Gorge. It's a movie. It was like an action-y, like like, I don't know, it was freaking awesome, and I loved it. It was all about that life. So, go watch it. I don't remember what it was on streaming, but
Apple.
yeah, was it? Did you see it, Mike? Have you seen it?
No, because I don't have an Apple subscription. But
Oh, okay, never mind.
I've seen trailers and clips from it.
He can't watch either of our picks, so
No. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it.
Way to go, Mike. Oh, all right. Manfred, do you have anything you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, so let's stick with TV shows I currently watched and I really enjoyed it, The Gentleman. It was a movie several years ago, but now it's also an episode and how do I call it? A series on Netflix. And it's really nice, a lot of dark humor and a bit brutal, but first and foremost, a lot of dark humor, and I really enjoyed it, The Gentleman.
yeah, that one's awesome. I agree too. Guy Ritchie. I'm waiting for season 2, so can't wait.
Oh, there is a season 2. Great.
Yeah, supposedly it got signed on for season 2. So
Oh, great. Looking forward to it.
You got a ton of comments and praise in the chat, Manfred. So thank you again for coming on and joining us. We are at the top of the hour, so we're going to wrap, but we will see you all next time. And thank you for being here, chat. You are all beautiful. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.